Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked into the massive chamber of the Galactic Concorde with her head held high and her heart beating fast inside her chest. She was the first human to ever stand in this hall and speak to the gathered species of the galaxy. The chamber was enormous and built from white stone that seemed to glow with its own light. Thousands of aliens sat in curved rows that rose up toward a ceiling, so high that Elena could barely see it. Some of them had scales, and some had fur, and some had bodies made of crystal or gas or things Elena could not even name. They had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years, and they looked at her the way a grown person looks at a child trying to explain something serious. Elena cleared her throat and activated the holographic display behind her. Images appeared in the air showing sensor data from Earth's deep space telescopes. The images showed something at the edge of the galaxy, and that something was moving. We call it the silence, Elena said, and her voice echoed through the chamber. Our telescopes first detected it 18 years ago, and we have been tracking it ever since. She pointed to a map that showed dozens of star systems, highlighted in red, every civilization. And these systems has gone dark, and when I say dark, I mean completely silent. No radio signals and no ship traffic, and no signs of life at all. We sent probes to investigate, and the probes never came back. Something is out there, and it is moving toward the center of the galaxy, and it is destroying everything in its path. The chamber was quiet for a moment, and then the laughter started. It began with the Velcari delegate, and his iridescent scales rippled with amusement as he made a sound. That was half chirp and half wheeze. Then the Morthani joined in with their deep rumbling chuckles, and the Celestian hive mind buzzed with what could only be mockery. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the sounds of 100 different species, laughing at the small human woman standing alone on the speaker's platform. Elena waited for them to finish, and she did not let her face show any emotion. The High Arbiter of the Concorde raised one of his forearms, and the laughter slowly died down. He was a Velcari, like the delegate, and his scales were deep purple with age and authority. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, and his translator made his voice sound smooth and condescending. Humanity has been traveling between stars for barely 2 centuries. You have 17 colony worlds. 17. He let that number hang in the air. The Velcari alone have controlled over 8,000 worlds for longer than your species has existed. The Concorde has mapped every corner of this galaxy. We have cataloged every threat and every danger and every anomaly worth noting. And you come here to Waijure to entry. Tell us that you have discovered something we missed. More laughter rippled through the chamber. Elena stood firm and spoke again, with respect. High Arbiter, the edge of the galaxy, is far from your territory. Your species and your allies have focused on the core worlds for millennia. You stopped looking outward a long time ago. We are new and we are small, but we are also curious and we are careful. We looked where you did not bother to look, and we found something terrible. The High Arbiter's scale shifted color, slightly showing annoyance. What you found, Ambassador, is probably a natural phenomenon, a dying star cluster or a region of unstable space. Your instruments are primitive, and your scientists are inexperienced. You have misread the data and turned shadows into monsters. Elena shook her head slowly. We have recordings of the attacks, fragments captured by automated stations before they went offline. The silence is not a natural phenomenon. It is a fleet, and it is hunting. She brought up new images showing massive, black shapes moving through space. The shapes were geometric and wrong, somehow like they did not belong in this universe. They were attacking a space station, and the station was being torn apart piece by piece. This footage was captured in the Varath system 7 years ago. Elena said, the Varath were a small civilization on the galaxy's edge. They had been spacefaring for about 3,000 years. They are gone now. Every single one of them. The chamber grew quieter, but the mockery had not left the eyes. Of the delegates, the Morthani representative spoke up, and her voice was deep and rumbling. Even if this footage is genuine, it shows a threat at the very edge of the galaxy. The edge is far from our worlds. Whatever this thing is, it would take thousands of years to reach us. We have time. We have always had time. Elena felt frustration rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. The silence is not moving slowly. It is accelerating. Based on our projections, it will reach the outer territories of Concord space within 100 years. That sounds like a long time, but it is not. You need to prepare. You need to build defenses and train soldiers and develop weapons. You need to take this seriously. The High Arbiter made a dismissive gesture with two of his hands. Humanity's fear is understandable. You are a young species born on a dangerous world. Your history is full of wars and disasters and extinction events. You see threats everywhere because that is how you survived on your harsh planet. But the galaxy is not Earth Ambassador. We have achieved peace and stability. We do not jump at shadows. He stood and his robes flowed around him like water. This session is adjourned. The Concord thanks humanity for sharing its concerns, but we will not waste resources chasing human paranoia. You may return to your worlds and sleep soundly, knowing that the Concord protects the galaxy as it has for 40,000 years. The delegates began to rise and file out of the chamber, still making sounds of amusement. Elena stood alone on the platform watching them go. Her aide Marcus approached her with worry on his face. That could have gone better, he said quietly. Elena turned off the holographic display and gathered her materials. It went exactly as I expected. They are old and comfortable, and they have forgotten what fear feels like. They think the universe is safe because they have made it safe for themselves. They cannot imagine something that might actually threaten them. Marcus looked around at the emptying chamber. What do we do now? We tried to warn them, and they laughed. Do we just go home and wait for the end? Elena walked toward the exit, with Marcus following close behind. No, she said firmly. We go home and we prepare. If the galaxy will not stand with us, then we will stand alone. We have 100 years. That is enough time to build something that might make a difference. Marcus was confused. Build what exactly? Elena stopped and looked back at the grand chamber one last time. The beautiful architecture and the gleaming technology and the ancient symbols of a civilization that thought it would last forever. A wall, she said. We build a wall between them and the darkness. And when the silence comes, we will be ready even if they are not. She turned and walked out of the chamber, and she did not look back again. Behind her, the galaxy continued its ancient routines of commerce and politics and petty disputes. They had no idea what was coming, but humanity knew, and humanity would remember that the galaxy had laughed. 70 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about humanity's warning. The great civilizations continued their ancient dances of trade and diplomacy and occasional small conflicts that meant nothing. They built new space stations and colonized new worlds and celebrated their eternal peace. They did not look toward the edge of the galaxy. They did not want to see what was coming, but humanity remembered. On Earth, the governments that had fought each other for thousands of years finally came together under a single purpose. They called it the United Terran Authority, and its only goal was survival. Every resource and every mind and every credit was directed toward one massive project. They called it the Bastion Initiative, and it was the largest military buildup in human history. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the UTS Defiance and looked out at the shipyard through the massive windows. He was 63 years old now, with gray hair and lines on his face that told stories of decades of preparation. The shipyard was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid in a system that did not appear on any galactic maps. Around him floated hundreds of warships in various stages of construction. They were not pretty ships. The Concord species built vessels that were elegant and beautiful, with smooth curves and artistic designs that reflected their ancient cultures. Human ships were ugly and brutal and covered in weapons. They were built for one purpose, and that purpose was war. Status report. Chun said to his tactical officer. Lieutenant Park Park pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of the Terran fleet. 12,000 capital ships completed, sir. 42,000 support craft, including fighters and bombers, and transport vessels. We also have 200 orbital defense platforms ready for deployment and another 500 under construction. Chun nodded, slowly taking in the numbers. And the weapons development program. Park switched to a different display. We have successfully reverse-engineered weapons. Technology from every Concord species. Valkyrie plasma cannons and Morthani. Kinetic accelerators and Celestian neural disruptors. We have also made improvements to all of them. Our plasma cannons now fire 30% faster than the Valkyrie originals. Our kinetic accelerators hit 40% harder than the Morthani versions. Chun allowed himself a small smile. What about the FTL inhibitors? Fully operational, sir. We can lock down an entire star system and prevent any ship from jumping to faster than light speed. Nothing gets in and nothing gets out. This was humanity's secret weapon. The Concord species had never developed such technology because they had never needed it. Their wars were polite affairs with rules and boundaries and negotiated surrenders. The idea of trapping an enemy fleet and forcing them to fight to the death was considered barbaric. Humans had no such concerns. Chun turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of his ship. The crew saluted as he passed, and he nodded to each of them. They were young, most of them born after Elena Vasquez had delivered her warning to the Concord. They had grown up knowing that something terrible was coming. Every human child learned about the silence in school. They ran evacuation drills and studied combat tactics and trained with weapons. Fear was not a weakness to humans. Fear was a tool that kept them sharp and ready. Chun entered his private quarters and sat down at his desk. A message was waiting for him from Earth, and he activated it. The face of President Okonkwo appeared on the screen. She was the third president since the Bastion Initiative had begun. And like her predecessors, she understood the mission. Admiral Chun, she said, I wanted to update you on the civilian preparations. We have completed the bunker networks on all 17 colony worlds. Every underground shelter can hold 10,000 people for up to 5 years. We have also established hidden food production facilities and water recycling systems and medical centers. If the worst happens, our people will survive underground until the danger passes. Chun leaned back in his chair. And the evacuation protocols. Every citizen knows their assigned shelter and their route to reach it. We run surprise drills every month. The average evacuation time has dropped to 4 hours for even our largest cities. Chun was satisfied with this news. What about the Concord? Do they suspect anything? Okonkwo shook her head. They still think we are building colony ships. Our shipyards are hidden and our fleet movements are disguised as merchant traffic. The Concord has no idea what we have been doing for the past 70 years. They still see us as a minor species with primitive technology. Chun thought about this for a moment. Good. Let them keep thinking that. When the time comes, the surprise will work in our favor. The message ended, and Chun sat alone in the darkness of his quarters. He thought about Elena Vasquez, who had died 15 years ago, never knowing if her warning would save anyone. He thought about his own children and grandchildren, who had grown up in the shadow of the coming storm. He thought about the billions of humans who had sacrificed comfort and peace to build this fleet. They had given up so much. They had worked so hard, and they did not even know if it would be enough. Chun pulled up the latest sensor data from the edge of the galaxy. The silence had consumed 12 more star systems since Vasquez had given her warning. Entire civilizations had been wiped out without a trace. The Concord still refused to acknowledge the threat. They called it the human obsession and made jokes about paranoid apes jumping at shadows. Chun felt anger rise in his chest. but he pushed it down. Anger was not useful right now. Only preparation was useful. A knock came at his door, and Lieutenant Park entered with a worried expression. "Sir, we have received new telemetry from our deep space probes. The silence has changed course." Chum stood up quickly. "Show me." Park activated a holographic map of the galaxy. A red line showed the projected path of the silence based on its previous movements. A new blue line showed its current trajectory. The blue line was pointing directly at the heart of Concord space. "They are accelerating, sir. At this rate, they will reach the outer Concord territories in 30 years. Maybe less." Chun stared at the map and felt the weight of 70 years pressing down on him. 30 years. He said quietly, "That is not much time, but it will have to be enough." He turned to Park with determination in his eyes. "Send word to all fleet commanders. We are moving to Phase 2 of the Bastion Initiative. All ships are to complete final preparations and move to staging positions. We will be ready when the darkness arrives." Park saluted and left to carry out the orders. Chun stood alone looking at the map and the approaching threat. The galaxy had laughed at humanity. The galaxy had called them paranoid and primitive. The galaxy had refused to prepare, but humanity had prepared anyway. And when the silence came, humanity would be waiting, not because they wanted glory or revenge, but because someone had to stand between the darkness and the light. And if the great civilizations of the galaxy would not do it, then the small young species from Earth would do it instead. That was what humans did. They survived. They protected their own, and sometimes they even protected those who would mock them. The stars were quiet now, but they would not be quiet for long. The Valkyrie homeworld of Ketharan was burning high arbiter. Thiessen watched from the window of his escape pod as massive black ships tore his world apart piece by piece. He was old now, even older than he had been when he laughed at the human ambassador 70 years ago. His scales had turned pale with age, and his forehands trembled as he gripped the edges of his seat. Below him, the great cities of his people were being reduced to ash. The orbital defense stations that were supposed to protect them had been destroyed in minutes. The mighty Valkyrie fleet that had dominated the galaxy for 40,000 years had been swatted aside like insects. The enemy ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. They were black and geometric with angles that hurt to look at. They did not communicate, and they did not negotiate, and they did not accept surrender. They simply destroyed. Thiessen had sent distress signals to every world in the Concord, begging for help. Most had responded with panic and confusion. They did not know what to do. They had never faced a threat like this. Their weapons were designed for small conflicts between civilized species, not for war. Against something that wanted only extinction, one response was different. It came from Earth. "Hold on." The message said, "We are coming." Thiessen had stared at those words for a long moment. Humanity, the species he had mocked and dismissed, the species he had called paranoid and primitive. They were coming to help. He did not understand why Admiral Chen Weilin stood on the bridge of the UTS Defiance as his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Ketharan system. He was 90 years old now, and his body was frail, but his mind was still sharp around him. 2000. Terran warships emerged from the void of space. They were ugly, brutal vessels, bristling with weapons and armored with thick plates of reinforced metal. They looked nothing like the elegant ships of the Concord. They looked like instruments of war. Because that is exactly what they were. A status report. Chum said calmly. Lieutenant Park, who had served with him for decades, pulled up the tactical display. "Enemy fleet detected, sir. 6,000 vessels concentrated around the planet. They are systematically destroying population centers. Estimated civilian casualties already in the billions." Chun felt his jaw tighten. Billions of lives lost, and the attack had only begun hours ago. "What about our odds?" Park hesitated. "They outnumber us 3-1, sir. Their ships are larger, and their Weapons are more powerful. Based on the data we have, their technology is significantly more advanced than anything we have seen. Chen nodded slowly. Then we will have to be smarter. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. You know why we are here. The enemy before us has destroyed countless civilizations. They have shown no mercy and no hesitation. They will not stop until everything is dead. He paused and looked around at his bridge crew. The Valkyrie laughed at us 70 years ago. They called us paranoid children. They refused to prepare. We could have let them face this alone. We could have stayed home and protected only our own worlds. But that is not who we are. We are human. And humans do not abandon people to die. Not even people who mocked us. He took a deep breath. Engage FTL inhibitors. Lock down this system. Nothing leaves until this fight is over. Across the fleet, massive generators powered up and sent waves of energy rippling through space. The fabric of reality itself twisted, and the pathways that allowed faster-than-light travel collapsed. The Catharan system was now a cage. No one could run. Not the enemy and not the humans. They would all stay and fight until one side was destroyed. The Silence noticed the new arrivals. A portion of their fleet broke away from the planet and turned toward the human ships. Chen watched them approach on his display. They moved in perfect formation. Without any wasted motion, they did not communicate or threaten or demand surrender. They simply came to kill. All ships engage. Chen ordered, "Remember your training. Remember what we fight for. Give them hell." The Battle of Catharan began. Terran ships unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons fired in rapid bursts. Kinetic accelerators launched projectiles at incredible speeds. Missiles swarmed through space in massive clouds. The silent ships absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any Concorde vessel. Their black holes seemed to drink in the energy of weapons fire, but they were not invincible. One of the massive ships began to crack under sustained bombardment. Explosions rippled across its surface, and it broke apart into pieces. The humans cheered, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy was fighting back. Beams of black energy lanced out from the silent ships. Wherever they touched, Terran vessels died. Shields failed and armor melted, and crews were vaporized in instants. Hundreds of human ships were destroyed in the first minutes of battle. But the humans did not run. They pressed forward, using tactics that the galaxy considered barbaric. When a ship was too damaged to fight, it did not retreat. It accelerated toward the nearest enemy and rammed it at full speed. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but that was acceptable. That was the human way. Captain Sarah Okonkwo commanded the UTS Vengeance, and she found herself surrounded by 3 enemy ships. Her weapons were damaged, and her shields were failing. "All hands prepare for impact," she announced calmly. "It has been an honor serving with you." She aimed her ship at the largest enemy vessel and pushed the engines to maximum. The Vengeance struck the silent ship like a missile, and both vessels exploded in a ball of fire. But the explosion damaged the other 2 enemy ships enough that nearby Terran vessels could finish them off. This scene repeated across the battlefield. Humans dying but taking enemies with them. Humans sacrificing themselves so that others could survive. Humans refusing to give up even when all hope seemed lost. The battle lasted for 12 hours. When it was over, the Silence fleet had been driven back, not destroyed, but forced to retreat for the first time in their existence. They pulled away from Catharan and regrouped at the edge of the system. The humans had won, but the cost was terrible. Of the 2,000 ships that had arrived, only 400 remained. 800,000 humans had died in a single day. Chun sat in his command chair, exhausted and heartbroken. He had sent so many people to their deaths, but they had saved billions of Valkyrie lives. The planet below was damaged, but not destroyed. There were survivors. His communications officer spoke up. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from a Valkyrie escape pod. It is High Arbiter Thiessen. He's requesting permission to come aboard. Chun closed his eyes for a moment. The alien who had laughed at him and his people was now begging for an audience. Grant permission. Chun said finally, bring him to the bridge. 20 minutes later, Thiessen stood before Admiral Chun. The old Valkyrie was shaking, and his scales had lost all color. He looked at the human admiral, and then at the display showing the devastation of the battle. You came, Thiessen said, and his voice was barely a whisper. You tried to warn us, and we laughed. We insulted you and ignored you, and you still came to help us. Chun looked at him without anger or satisfaction. Yes. Why? It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything. Why would humans risk their lives for those who had treated them with contempt? Chun was quiet for a long moment. Because you were dying. He said finally, because someone had to help. Because that is what you do when people are in danger. Even people who wronged you. Thiessen bowed his head in shame. We were fools. We thought we were so wise and so powerful. We thought we knew everything. We knew nothing. Chun placed a hand on the alien's shoulder. The past does not matter now. What matters is what comes next. The silence has been stopped today, but they will return. They will keep coming until they are destroyed. Or until we are. The question is whether the galaxy will fight together or die separately. Thiessen looked up at the human with new respect in his eyes. What do you need from us? Chun smiled grimly. Everything. We need ships and soldiers and resources. We need the Concord to wake up and realize that this is a war for survival. We need everyone to fight like humans. Can you do that? Thiessen straightened his posture, and for a moment, he looked like the proud leader he had once been. I can try. I owe you that much. I owe you everything. Chun nodded. Then let us begin. Outside the window, the stars were quiet again. But they both knew the darkness was still out there, waiting hungry, and it would return soon. The Galactic Concord chamber looked very different now. Half of the seats were empty, because the species that once filled them no longer existed. The Varath and the Kosani and the Morthani and dozens of others had been consumed by the silence. Their worlds were dead, and their people were gone, and their names would soon be forgotten. The survivors sat in fearful silence as Elena Vasquez's granddaughter walked to the speaker's platform. Her name was Maria, and she was 35 years old with dark hair and her grandmother's fierce eyes. Behind her, a holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked territories that had fallen to the silence. There was a lot of red. You asked for our help, Maria said, and her voice echoed through the chamber. You begged for it, actually. After decades of ignoring our warnings and mocking our preparations, you finally realized that we were right. She let those words hang in the air. Humanity has spent the last 5 years fighting this war almost alone. We have lost millions of soldiers and thousands of ships. We have sacrificed more than any species in this chamber can imagine. And now you want us to save you. The Valkyrie delegate rose to speak. He was young for his species, and his scales were a deep blue that showed his nervousness. We know that we failed humanity, he said. We know that our arrogance may have doomed us all. We are not asking you to forgive us. We are asking you to give us a chance to fight alongside you, to make up for our mistakes. Maria studied him for a long moment. You want a chance? Fine, but understand what that means. She activated a new display showing a map of the galaxy. A line of red dots stretched across a narrow corridor of space. This is the Terran blockade. It represents the only path the silence can use to reach the core worlds. We have positioned 12,000 ships along this line, supported by weapons platforms and automated defense stations. Every ship that tries to pass through will have to go through us. The delegates murmured in shock. 12,000 ships was more than all the remaining Concord fleets combined. How is this possible? The Celestian hive mind asked through their speaker. How did humanity build such a force in secret? Maria smiled without warmth. "We started preparing 70 years ago. While you were laughing at my grandmother, we were building shipyards and training soldiers and developing weapons. We knew this day would come. We knew you would not be ready. So we got ready for all of us." She turned back to the map. "The blockade will hold the line, but we cannot do it alone forever. We need resources and supplies and replacement ships. We need the Concorde to contribute everything it has left. This is not a request. This is the price of survival." The delegates looked at each other, and then one by one they nodded their agreement. What choice did they have? Humanity was the only thing standing between them and extinction. 3 years later, Maria stood on the bridge of the UTS Resolution watching the latest wave of silent ships approach the blockade. She had taken command of the fleet after Admiral Chun died in battle the previous year. His body had been sent back to Earth for burial, but his spirit remained with the fleet. Every ship carried his words painted on their hulls. "Someone has to stand. Enemy contact." In 15 minutes, her tactical officer reported 800 vessels approaching Sector 7. Maria nodded and opened a channel to the ships in that sector. "7th Fleet, this is Fleet Admiral Vasquez. You know what to do. Make them pay for every inch of space. Resolution out." She closed the channel and watched the display. This was the 47th major assault in 3 years. The silence kept coming in endless waves. They never negotiated and never retreated and never showed any sign of fear or hesitation. They simply attacked again and again, and every time the humans stopped them, the cost was enormous. 2 million Terran soldiers had died holding the blockade. Ships were destroyed faster than they could be replaced, even with the Concords. Resources added to humanity's production. The line was getting thinner, but it was still holding. Captain James Okonkwo commanded the UTS Fury in the 7th Fleet. He was the grandson of Captain Sarah Okonkwo, who had died ramming her ship into An. Enemy at Ketharan, her sacrifice was legendary now, and James carried that legacy with pride. "All batteries target the lead vessel," he ordered. "Fire on my mark." The silent ships came closer, their black hulls absorbing the light of distant stars. They were beautiful in a terrible way, like predators that had evolved to perfect killing mark. The Fury unleashed everything. Plasma and kinetic rounds and missiles all streaking toward the enemy around him. The other ships of the 7th Fleet did the same. Space lit up with weapons fire. The lead silent ship shuddered under the assault. Cracks appeared in its hull and fire bloomed from within. Then it exploded, but there were hundreds more behind it. The battle raged for hours. Ships died on both sides. James watched friends he had known for years vanish in balls of fire. He watched young officers who had never seen combat become heroes in their final moments. He watched the line bend but not break. When it was over, the silence had retreated again. The 7th Fleet had lost 60% of its ships. James sat in his command chair, covered in sweat and exhaustion. His hands were shaking, and he could not make them stop. Incoming transmission from command. His communications officer said. Maria's face appeared on the screen. "Captain Okonkwo, Fleet Admiral, I watched your performance today. Your grandmother would be proud." James felt tears forming in his eyes, but he held them back. "Thank you, sir. We lost a lot of good people," Maria nodded. "We always do. That is the cost of this war. But we are still here. We are still fighting. And as long as we keep fighting, there is hope." James looked at the display showing the damage to his ship and the empty spaces where his fellow vessels used to be. "Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. How long can we keep this up? How long until we run out of ships and soldiers and the will to fight?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "I do not know, Captain. But I know that every day we hold this line is another day the core world survive. Another day for children to grow up without knowing the horror we face. Another day for civilizations to exist. That is worth fighting for. That is worth dying for." She paused. The enemy captured one of our communication probes last month. Our analysts managed to intercept a fragment of their internal communications before they destroyed it. Do you want to know what they said? About us. James leaned forward. What? Maria's expression was strange, somewhere between pride and sorrow. They asked why we do not flee, why we do not break. They have consumed thousands of civilizations across millions of years. Every single one eventually ran or surrendered or simply gave up. We are the first species that keeps fighting no matter what. They do not understand us. They cannot comprehend why we would die for strangers. James thought about his grandmother who had sacrificed herself for aliens who had mocked humanity. He thought about Admiral Chen, who had spent his entire life preparing for a war he knew he might not survive. He thought about the millions of humans who had given everything to hold this line. Because behind us is everyone else. James said quietly, that is what my grandmother said before she died. Because behind us is everyone else. Maria nodded. That is why we fight, Captain. That is why we will never stop. The silence may not understand us, but they will learn to fear us. Now get your ship repaired. I need you back on the line in 48 hours. James saluted. Yes, sir. The screen went dark. Outside the window, the stars were quiet again. But James knew the next attack was coming. It was always coming. And humanity would be ready, because that was what humans did. They stood when others ran. They fought when others surrendered. They protected when others abandoned. And they would keep doing it until the darkness was gone, or until they were there. Was no other option? There never had been. The war lasted 30 years. When it finally ended, the silence had been pushed back beyond the edge of the galaxy. They were not destroyed, because such a thing might not be possible. But they were contained. A permanent human garrison now watched the void between galaxies, ready to sound the alarm if the darkness ever returned. The cost of victory was beyond measure. 4 billion humans had died in the war. 100 colony worlds had been reduced to ash. An entire generation had grown up, knowing nothing but battle and sacrifice and loss. But humanity endured, and so did the galaxy because of them. The new Galactic Concord met on Earth for the first time in history. It was humanity's request, and no one dared refuse the great species, who remained gathered in Geneva in a hall built among human monuments to human wars. The location was deliberate. Humanity wanted the galaxy to see where they came from. They wanted them to understand that war was not new to the species that had saved them. The delegates sat in rows facing a simple stage. There were fewer of them now. The Valkyrie were still there, though their numbers had been reduced by 90%. The Silesian hive mind had survived, though half of their colonies were gone. A handful of other species remained, each one owing their existence to human sacrifice. The new High Arbiter was a young Valkyrie named Thyssen II. He was the grandson of the one who had laughed at Elena Vasquez and then been rescued by Admiral Chen. He had grown up hearing stories of human bravery and human sacrifice. He had dedicated his life to honoring the debt his people owed. Now he rose to address the assembly. For 40,000 years, he began. We believed ourselves the pinnacle of civilization. We built wonders that spanned star systems. We mapped the galaxy and cataloged its secrets. We achieved peace and stability and prosperity. We thought we understood the universe. He paused, and his scale shifted to a deep shade of shame. We understood nothing. The humans came to us as children barely 2 centuries into their spacefaring existence. They had 17 colony worlds. 17. We had 8,000. We looked at them and saw primitives. We heard their warnings and laughed. We dismissed their fears as paranoia born from a violent evolutionary history. He looked around the chamber at the surviving delegates, and then the darkness came. And our 8,000 worlds meant nothing. Our 40,000 years of civilization meant nothing. Our elegant ships and ancient wisdom meant nothing. We died in our billions while the primitives we had mocked prepared for war. Thiessen turned to look at the human delegation. When the silence reached our worlds, we sent desperate pleas for help. We begged for salvation from the very species we had insulted, and they came. They did not have to. They could have let us burn. For our arrogance, they could have protected only themselves and watched the galaxy fall. But they came. They fought and died for us. 4 billion of them gave their lives so that we might survive. His voice cracked with emotion. I have spent my entire life trying to understand why. Why would they sacrifice so much for species who had treated them with contempt? Why would they stand between us and extinction when we had refused to stand with them? I asked my grandfather this question before he died. Do you know what he told me? Thiessen looked directly at the human delegation. He said he asked Admiral Chun the same question 70 years ago. And Chun's answer was simply, because you were dying and someone had to help. As if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. As if there could be no other response to suffering than to try to end it. Thiessen shook his head in wonder. I still do not fully understand it, but I know that I owe my existence to it. Every being in this chamber owes their existence to it. Every world that still holds life owes its survival to human stubbornness and human sacrifice. He bowed deeply toward the human delegation. And so I ask you now, you who saved us all, you who bled and died for strangers who wronged you, why? Help me understand. Why did you do it? The human delegation was quiet for a moment. Then a young woman rose from her seat. Her name was Isabella Vasquez Chen. She was the great-granddaughter of Elena Vasquez and the great-great-granddaughter of Admiral Chen through his daughter. She carried both family names and both family legacies. She was 30 years old, born just after the war ended, but she carried the weight of everything her ancestors had done. High Arbiter Thiessen, she said, and her voice was clear and strong. My great-grandmother stood in a chamber much like this one over a century ago. She warned the galaxy about the coming darkness, and the galaxy laughed. She stepped forward onto the stage. Humanity remembers that laughter. We remember every slight and every insult, and every dismissal. We remember how we were called paranoid primitives. We remember how our warnings were ignored. We have very long memories. The delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but we also remember something else. We remember that spite and vengeance are luxuries. We remember that the universe does not care about hurt feelings or wounded pride. We remember that when darkness comes, there is only one thing that matters: survival. Not just our survival, everyone's survival. She looked around the chamber at all the alien faces watching her. My ancestors could have let you burn. They could have stayed home and built walls around our worlds and watched the galaxy fall. Part of them probably wanted to. You had hurt them and dismissed them and made them feel small. That is not easy to forgive. But they looked at the situation and asked themselves a question. Not what do they deserve, but what is right. And the answer was obvious. When people are dying, you help them. When darkness threatens, you fight it. When others cannot protect themselves, you protect them. That is what you do. That is what it means to be human. She smiled, and there was warmth in it despite everything. We are petty enough to remember every wrong done to us, but we are stubborn enough to save you anyway. That is humanity. We hold grudges and we fight to the death, and we never ever give up. Not on ourselves, not on each other, not on anyone. Thiessen was staring at her with something like awe in his eyes. You truly do not hate us, even after everything. Isabella considered the question carefully. We remember what you did. We will always remember. But hatred requires energy that we would rather spend on building and creating and exploring. The past is the past. What matters now is the future. A future that we all get to have because we stood together. When it mattered, she extended her hand toward Thiessen. The galaxy laughed at our warning. We could have let you pay for that mistake with extinction. Instead, we blocked the stars and held the line. 4 billion of us died so that you could live. Now we are asking for one thing in return. Thiessen stepped forward and took her hand. Name it. Remember. Remember what happened here. Remember the arrogance that almost doomed us all. Remember the sacrifice that saved us. Remember that the youngest and smallest species in the galaxy was the one that stood between everyone and the darkness. Remember that cooperation and humility and vigilance are not weaknesses. They are the only things that will keep us alive. Can you do that? Thiessen gripped her hand firmly. I can. We all can. Let the stars remember that when darkness came, humanity was the light that held. Let every child born in this galaxy learn the story of the small species that refused to abandon its neighbors. Let your sacrifice never be forgotten. Isabella nodded. Then we have an agreement. Let us build something better together. Let us face whatever comes next as allies. Let us prove that the 4 billion who died did not die in vain. She turned to address the entire chamber. The war is over. The darkness is contained, but the work is not finished. It is never finished. There will always be new threats and new challenges and new reasons to be afraid. The question is not whether we will face them. The question is whether we will face them together. Humanity has given its answer. Now it is your turn. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the delegates began to stand one by one. They stood in respect and gratitude and something that might have been hope. For the first time in galactic history, every species in the Concord stood together, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine unity. The stars had watched humanity's sacrifice. The stars had watched the galaxy nearly fall. The stars had watched a small young species from a violent world save everyone, and the stars would remember forever. On Earth, children played in parks that had been built on the sites of old military bases. They learned about the war in school, but it was history to them. They knew the names of Elena Vasquez and Chen Wei-Lin and Sarah Okonkwo and all the heroes who had given everything. They knew that humanity had saved the galaxy, and they knew that if the darkness ever returned, humanity would stand again, because that was what humans did. They remembered, they prepared, they protected, and they never ever gave up the end.